Many people wonder about the position of the Catholic Church on domestic violence, and that's our topic today. The good news is that the Catholic bishops of the United States, have written a wonderful, beautiful pastoral letter called When I Call for Help. You can Google that, it comes right up, When I Call for Help. And in the first paragraph of that letter, they state very sharply, we declare as clearly and strongly as we can that violence against women, inside or outside the home, is never justified. Violence in any form, physical, psychological, sexual, verbal, is a sin, and often it is a crime. These words make it very clear what the position of the Catholic Church is, that no one is to be suffering in their home. The bishops in their letter go on to talk about, well, why do people abuse their partners? Or why do people distort the scriptures to justify any form of abuse? Or why do victims stay instead of just leaving? And what can the church do about that? And then, at the end of the letter, they conclude by saying, we emphasize that no one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. Those are words of liberation for many women and some men. No one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. Those are the words, and that's the message that we Catholics need to get to everyone, because there is a lot of misunderstanding that people are somehow or other obliged to stay in an abusive marriage. I think all we have to do is think about Jesus. What would he do? What would he say? And we can imagine Jesus walking down the street one day and coming across a woman who has a black eye and her arm is in a sling, and he says, well, what happened to you? And she said, well, my husband beat me. What do we think that Jesus would tell her? Would he say, you have to go back to him and work it out? Or would he say, come with me and I will make you safe? I think that's what he would say. And that's what we, as the Church of Jesus Christ, need to say. Now, unfortunately, some people, including priests, give a different message to victims of domestic violence. They might tell them, you have to stay, you have to go back and live with your husband. I know a priest who actually told a woman that if she did not go back to her husband, who was abusing her, that she was putting her own eternal salvation at risk, and she was putting the eternal salvation of her children at risk. Well, that is not the position of the Catholic Church. It does not want anybody to remain in an abusive or violent relationship. Now, some priests might counsel marriage counseling. They might think that that's a solution. But actually, it's a truism in the area of pastoral counseling that marriage counseling is inadequate, inappropriate for domestic violence. It treats a marriage problem as though it were two-sided, whereas in domestic violence, it's really the power and control of one person over another. I'll tell you a story about a woman who came to see me, very concerned. She had seen a psychiatrist. She was depressed. She was a victim of domestic violence. And she and her husband had gone to marriage counseling. So I asked her, so what did the psychiatrist tell you when you visit him? And she said, well, he doesn't really tell me anything because he really just prescribes drugs. He doesn't give me psychotherapy, which is not uncommon, unfortunately. And I said, well, what does the marriage counselor tell you? And she said, well, no, she doesn't tell me anything either. And I said, well, why not? And she said, well, when we go to the sessions, I never mention any of the abuse because I think that when we come home, it'll be worse for me. He will take it out on me, so I don't say anything. So this story gives us an idea about why domestic violence should not be treated in marriage counseling. Frequently, there isn't the freedom that a victim needs to talk about the abuse. Now, sometimes we know that a priest might just say, well, go home and pray about it. And prayer is always important. We always should do it. But we need to give more direction. We need to help people find the professional services they need so they can get the help that they need, reflecting upon the abuse that they're experiencing. I think one of the most important things is that we should not be emphasizing forgiveness. And I know that that's one thing that we all want. Jesus talked about how we have to forgive one another. But in the case of domestic violence, of somebody, let's say, who has experienced abuse for years and years, to expect that person to be able to forgive in the short term is asking too much. It's not reasonable. Obviously, someone would want to forgive, but it would be very difficult. The wounds are deep, and they take a long time to heal. And what's more important is to focus on the healing of the person, the safety and then the healing of the person. Anyone who's a victim of domestic violence and is getting out of that relationship is experiencing enormous change, a whole new definition of oneself as an independent and capable person, someone who can have healthy relationships, which until then they probably have not had. So to ask them to also focus on forgiveness is premature, and we need to allow them time to work on that. The Catholic Church has certain conditions that it believes are necessary for a Catholic marriage. For a marriage to be valid, we have to fulfill certain necessary conditions. I mean, one obvious condition is that the persons be old enough and mature enough to accept that or make that kind of a commitment. Perhaps the person was forced into the marriage, so free will was lacking, which is a necessary condition. Or perhaps the person is compromised by, let's say, an addiction, such as alcoholism or something like that. Well, that also means there is not a necessary condition present. But also the lack of commitment that people might have when they make their vows. It might be that they were deceitful or insincere or didn't understand them when they said, I will love you and honor you all the days of your life. And they don't do that. We don't know that until later when we see their behavior, that they in fact do not love and honor, but they abuse and mistreat. So it seems that they don't understand. Perhaps they've become unfaithful. Perhaps they've denied their partner the right to have children. All of these are necessary conditions. And when they are not present, the Catholic Church considers those marriages not to be valid. And they can be declared null and void. So that is the position of the Catholic Church. And frequently, victims who are of domestic violence are people who are living in marriages which were really invalid because of the necessary conditions required at the time of the marriage. So these are some ideas about what we as Catholics believe and what we hold about domestic violence and marriage. I want to emphasize again what the bishop said, and that is, we need to declare as strongly and clearly as we can that violence against women, inside or outside the home, is never justified. And they said, we emphasize that no one is expected to stay in an abusive marriage. Those are the words that we need to tell everyone so they understand the position of the Catholic Church. We are against any form of violence in a marital relationship, and we want the victims to free themselves, and we are here to help them.